During a heated primetime television interview broadcast live, New York City Mayor Eric Adams launched a scathing personal attack on Assembly member Zohran Mamdani, clearly expecting an easy victory. But Mamdani, known for his grassroots organizing and unapologetic advocacy for the working class, didn't flinch. Instead, he delivered a quiet but devastating response that left Adams completely stunned. The exchange went viral within minutes, and soon the entire city was talking. The television studio was unusually tense that evening. Cameras tracked every movement. Producers whispered urgently into headsets. Across New York, viewers leaned in, transfixed. The setting was Voices of the City, NY1's newest primetime special, featuring face-to-face conversations between public figures with clashing viewpoints. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation. Red and blue stage lights lit up the sleek black studio, where two imposing chairs faced each other across a narrow table. Mayor Adams adjusted his lapel mic with visible confidence, a controlled smirk curling at the corners of his mouth. He wore a tailored charcoal suit with a pin that read, "Public Safety First." Across from him sat Zohran Mamdani, calm and composed, in a modest earth-tone kurta beneath a simple blazer, a reflection of his people-first identity. His hands were folded in his lap. His presence was grounded, almost defiant in its stillness. Tonight on Voices of the City, we bring together Mayor Eric Adams and Assembly member Zohran Mamdani to discuss homelessness, tenant protections, and the role of public policy in solving New York's housing crisis. The host began, her voice even, but charged with expectation. Mayor Adams, you've been quite outspoken about Assemblyman Mamdani's opposition to your administration's housing initiatives, she continued. Absolutely, Adams said, turning toward Mamdani with measured scorn. We can't keep letting radical ideologues sabotage real progress. This is someone who rails against luxury development but offers no viable alternative, who protests in the streets while working families suffer in silence. I think the public deserves to know the truth behind this performance. Mamdani's expression remained steady as Adams pressed forward, though a slight narrowing of his eyes betrayed a hint of anticipation rather than offense. He's part of a political machine that romanticizes dysfunction, while real New Yorkers are sleeping on sidewalks, Adams declared, waving a hand dismissively. His slogans may trend on Twitter, but they don't build shelters, they don't fill fridges, they don't prevent evictions. Adams leaned in, voice rising with carefully honed moral urgency. And now he wants to lecture me on compassion? This is a man who has voted against initiatives that would have increased shelter capacity and restructured NYPD enforcement to clean up our subways. The same subways where working-class people, black and brown people, are begging for safety and dignity. Behind the cameras, public housing advocates and tenant organizers in the audience exchanged uneasy glances. One whispered, "He's really going there, calling Mamdani a threat to public safety?" "Just watch," replied another. "He clearly doesn't know who he's sitting across from." Adams, emboldened, pressed on. "Let's be absolutely clear about what's happening here. Assemblymember Mamdani has spent the last year criticizing my administration's housing strategy," Adams declared, shifting his tone to one of calculated disapproval, all while promoting his own so-called tenant advocacy groups. But where was this compassion during the years he spent protesting from the sidelines, refusing to support initiatives that could have gotten people off the streets? Where was this urgency when his political ally blocked housing developments in his own district? He turned directly to Mamdani, a smug glint in his eye. Your rhetoric, especially your calls to cancel rent and defund every part of city enforcement, has created a culture of gridlock and neglect, where ideology outweighs impact and slogans replace service. You've contributed to a climate where landlords walk away from their buildings and tenants are left in squalor. The suffering we see on our streets today, that's on people who weaponize idealism instead of building policy. The studio went quiet. Even the host looked momentarily startled by the directness of the accusation. "And let's talk about your so-called tenants collective," Adams continued, his voice dripping with disdain. "A convenient activist platform that generates social media clout while doing next to nothing to solve the structural crisis tenants face. It's performance activism at its worst, symbolism without substance. Empty politics that camouflage the deeper system, failures which people like you refuse to engage with. Because real work isn't viral. He crossed one leg over the other confidently and delivered the final jab. So before you attack my plan to increase emergency shelter access or modernize our housing review boards, maybe take a look in the mirror and ask yourself, how many working-class families were evicted while you staged rallies outside City Hall instead of fighting for workable policy inside it? Silence blanketed the room. The host, clearing her throat gently, attempted to mediate. Those are strong accusations, Mr. Mayor. Assemblymember Mamdani, would you like to respond to these rather personal critiques? All cameras turned to Zohran Mamdani. Would he erupt in anger? Would he walk off the set after such a pointed attack? Producers leaned forward in their seats. The drama was irresistible, but Mamdani didn't move. His hands remained calmly folded. He looked up slowly, then removed the pen he'd been holding and placed it gently on the table. He adjusted his posture, not defensively, but with quiet determination. "Thank you for giving me a chance to respond," he said, his voice firm yet grounded, carrying the quiet weight of someone who had lived the very issues being debated. The air in the studio tightened with anticipation. "Mr. Mayor," he began, looking Adams directly in the eye, "I understand why attacking my activism might feel like a shortcut to legitimacy, but there's something I need to say before you continue down that road." Adams opened his mouth to interrupt, but Mamdani gently raised his hand. "Please," he said quietly. The studio went still. Even Adams hesitated. Something in Mamdani's tone, not defensive, not theatrical, but undeniably real, stilled the room. "You came here tonight to score points by tearing down my credibility," Mamdani said calmly, his words cutting through the air like glass. "But while you've been giving press conferences and blaming poor people for a broken system, I've been spending the last 6 years walking through buildings with mold-ridden walls, attending eviction court with single mothers, and organizing rent strikes, not for headlines, not for legacy, but because people had no one else to turn to." He leaned forward, eyes locked on Adams. "And what I've learned from them, Mr. Mayor, might surprise you." The studio erupted in low murmurs. "What's he about to reveal?" someone whispered. "May I share something with you?" Mamdani asked, reaching into a folder beside him. The host gave a silent nod, realizing that something powerful was about to unfold. "May I share something with you?" Mamdani asked, reaching into the folder by his side. The host gave a small nod, sensing the gravity of the moment unfolding. "Mayor Adams accused me of romanticizing suffering," Mamdani said, carefully opening a worn red binder. "But I'd like you to meet someone. Her name is Amina." The studio screens lit up with a photograph of a middle-aged woman standing in front of a rundown Bronx apartment building. She held a toddler in one arm, the other hand gripping a torn lease. Amina is a single mother of 2. When I met her in 2021, she had been waiting 6 months for a response from the city's rental assistance hotline while facing eviction. Her landlord had turned off the heat in February. Gasps moved across the room. Adams's expression tightened. "She told me something I'll never forget," Mamdani continued. "She said, 'Assemblyman, I don't need a press conference or a speech. I just need someone to call me back before they throw me and my kids into the street.'" The camera cut to Amina sitting in the audience, tears glistening in her eyes as she nodded silently. "You see, Mr. Mayor," Mamdani said, turning calmly back to Adams, "while politicians trade in headlines, people like Amina live in silence, and their stories don't fit neatly into talking points." Adams' confident posture stiffened ever so slightly. "And this is Hector," Mamdani continued, revealing another photo, this one of an elderly Latino man standing in front of a locked community center. He was evicted during the pandemic. Today he sleeps in his cousin's hallway, waiting on housing vouchers that were promised but never arrived. The camera found Hector in the audience, his back straight but his eyes tired, his dignity still intact. "Hector told me, 'The mayor says he wants safety, so do I. But I haven't felt safe since the day I lost my home.'" One by one, Mamdani introduced faces, names, and stories, each a testimony not to policy theory, but to lived reality. There was Tanya, a housing worker laid off mid-crisis. Darnell, a delivery driver sleeping in his car after being priced out of Crown Heights. And Aisha, a domestic worker whose daughter was hospitalized due to black mold in their public housing unit. The room had fallen completely silent. "These stories aren't political props," Mamdani said, his voice unwavering. "They are truths. They are what happens when bureaucracy is allowed to speak louder than humanity." He turned to Adams. "And what's most revealing, Mr. Mayor, is this. These aren't people from someone else's city. They're from yours. They live in the neighborhoods you claim to represent." Then, with steady hands, Mamdani pulled out several folded letters. "These," he said, holding them up, "are unanswered requests sent directly to your office. Pleas for help, for mediation, for just one call back. None of them got a response." The host leaned forward slightly, realizing the moment had reached a tipping point. "These people didn't ask for ideology," Mamdani said. "They asked for accountability, and they got silence." The host leaned forward slightly. "What do you mean, Assembly Member Mamdani?" "Last month, I visited a tenant organizing meeting in East New York," Mamdani explained. "I do these visits regularly, no cameras, no press, just to listen. And that night, several people came up to me. They didn't want to talk about housing theory or budget line items. They wanted to talk about trying to get help from your office." He unfolded the letters slowly, deliberately. "These are copies of emails and physical letters residents sent to your administration. Cries for assistance that went unanswered, while you were giving speeches about how much you care about public safety and housing equity." Gasps erupted in the studio. In the control room, the producer barked into her headset, "Zoom in on Adams, now." Adams's confident posture wavered as his eyes darted to the papers. "That's not possible," he muttered unconvincingly. "My office has response systems. We have outreach teams. We return all constituent concerns." Mamdani gently placed the first letter on the table between them. "Fatima Yusuf, Brooklyn. Her Section 8 renewal was delayed for 6 months. She sent 4 emails, left 3 voicemails, and visited your constituent services office twice. No one responded. Her family was days from being evicted." The camera found Fatima in the audience. She nodded slowly, her face a mix of dignity, hurt, and relief. "She told me," Mamdani continued, "I live in the mayor's city, but it's like I don't exist. I don't need inspiration. I need a lease that won't expire while I'm waiting on a callback." He lifted another paper. "Marcus Bell, a disabled MTA worker who lost his apartment in Harlem during COVID. He called your office 6 times in 1 month. The only advice he got was to check a website." The camera cut to Marcus. His prosthetic leg was visible as he sat silently, nodding. "Marcus told me, I wasn't looking for miracles. I just wanted someone to call the housing authority and ask why I was left on hold for 6 months while my rent tripled." The audience sat in stunned silence. Mamdani's voice dropped, now tinged with restrained anger. "But perhaps the most painful story I heard was from Mr. Leon Grant, lifelong New Yorker, Vietnam veteran, living in a rent-stabilized apartment until a fire forced him out." He looked directly at Adams. "When he reached out to your office about emergency relocation, he was transferred 3 times. In the same week, you posted 5 tweets about veteran dignity and housing reform." The camera found Mr. Grant, a proud, elderly black man in the front row. He stood up slowly, wearing an NYPD cap from his post-military service days. Tears welled in his eyes. "He told me," Mamdani said softly, "I fought for this country and served this city. I'm not asking for favors. I'm asking to not be forgotten." The studio froze. Adams said nothing. His earlier confidence had completely drained from his face. Mamdani didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Mr. Mayor," he said, "you accuse me of performative politics. But these people, your constituents, feel abandoned by something far worse. A government that uses their pain for slogans but disappears when they ask for help." 15 unbearable seconds passed. Then, from somewhere in the audience, a woman whispered loudly enough to be caught on the studio mic. "He's telling the truth." When Adams finally spoke, his voice had lost its rehearsed rhythm. I wasn't aware of these specific cases." My staff handles thousands of requests respectfully, Adams began to say. But Mamdani cut in, calmly but firmly. This isn't about a few isolated cases. This is a pattern. He pointed toward the audience. These people don't need revolutionary branding. They need their phone calls returned. They need their applications processed. They need the basic rights and services they were promised as residents of this city. He paused, scanning the room. Mr. Mayor, ask the people here tonight what matters more to them, another campaign about long-term systemic visions, or getting an answer from 311 before they lose their homes. Then slowly Mamdani stood. The room hushed. He addressed the audience directly. How many of you believe what you need most right now is a radical reimagining of the entire housing system? Not a single hand went up. The silence was thunderous. Then he asked, and how many of you simply wanted the current system to work? Your rent assistance processed on time, your eviction hearings attended by someone who actually knows your name, your heat turned on before winter arrives. Almost every hand in the room shot up. Several people stood as they raised their hands. The emotion was visceral. The visual, unforgettable. The camera panned across the studio. In the control room, the producer whispered, "Hold this shot. Don't cut. This is real." Mamdani slowly sat back down and looked directly at Adams. "Mr. Mayor," he said evenly, "you came here to discredit me, to imply that I exploit suffering. But the people I've met, the ones in your own neighborhoods, don't feel betrayed by my activism. They feel betrayed by a city government that uses their pain as political stage dressing while ignoring their actual calls for help." Almost instantly, hashtags began trending. @Mamdani Truth, #Adams Exposed, @We're Not Props. Twitter lit up with testimonials, tenants tagging the mayor's office with screenshots of unanswered messages, organizers sharing similar cases of abandonment. Facebook groups for housing justice flooded with clips from the exchange, reaching hundreds of thousands in less than an hour. In a Bronx walk-up, an elderly tenant watching on her cracked TV whispered, "Finally, someone said it." At tenant meetings from Queens to Harlem, people watched together in silence, many recognizing their own stories in Mamdani's words. Back in the studio, Mamdani turned to Adams once more. "I didn't come here to humiliate you," he said gently. "I came here because New Yorkers deserve better than this, better than being used as political ornaments while their needs go unheard." The room was still. Adams, once smug, looked visibly moved, perhaps even shaken. "Politicians of all stripes have failed renters, seniors, immigrants, and working-class families in this city," Mamdani continued. "This isn't left versus right. It's right versus wrong. These people kept their end of the social contract. It's time we honored ours." The camera caught one woman in the audience wiping tears as she nodded slowly. "You can attack my methods all you want," Mamdani said, his voice firm but calm. "But while you've been talking about helping the poor, I've been in their homes, sitting with them, listening to them, fighting for them, including those in your own borough who couldn't even get a response from your office." In apartments across the city, people stared in stunned silence. Some wept, others nodded solemnly, seeing their own long waits, ignored calls, and broken promises finally spoken aloud. "Assembly Member Mamdani," the host asked, her voice soft but charged with intensity, "what do you believe should be done?" Mamdani didn't hesitate. "Start with the basics," and he said. "Pick up the phone, respond to emails, process housing applications, streamline emergency services, treat low-income tenants, immigrants, and working families with the same urgency and respect this city expects from them every day." He gestured gently towards Adams. The mayor's passion for long-term reform might be admirable if it were paired with actual service to the people most affected by his policies. They don't need theories about tomorrow. They need justice today. For the remainder of the segment, Adams struggled to recover his footing. But the damage was done. His attempt to paint Mamdani as an out-of-touch radical had backfired spectacularly, revealing instead his own failure to serve the very New Yorkers he claimed to champion. Within 30 minutes of the broadcast's end, clips of the exchange exploded across social media. Millions of views poured in from every platform, Cable news broke into regular programming to cover the confrontation, with commentators calling it one of the rawest and most honest political moments in recent memory. Tenant advocacy groups from across the city issued statements praising Mamdani's courage. The NYC Housing Coalition posted, "Tonight, Zohran Mamdani said what working-class people have been shouting for years. We don't need speeches. We need action." In a small apartment in the South Bronx, Fatima Yusuf, whose letter Mamdani had read, sat speechless on her couch. She gently touched the screen. "He actually read my letter. On live TV. Someone finally heard me." Her phone lit up with messages from neighbors, tenant organizers, even reporters. By morning, her story would appear on the cover of the Daily News. Ignored no more. Bronx mother's plea heard by millions. Meanwhile, at City Hall, Adams's constituent services team worked overnight. The voicemail inbox filled within the hour. Twitter and Instagram mentions spiraled into the thousands. Constituents flooded DMs and emails demanding accountability. At a tenants' union hall in Queensbridge, residents held an emergency meeting. Many brought printed copies of unanswered correspondence from City Hall. Local reporters showed up, capturing interviews that reflected the raw emotion from the night before. "I've been trying to get help with my relocation for 11 months, said one elderly woman, holding up a crumpled folder. "After last night, maybe, just maybe, they'll finally call back." The next morning, something unprecedented happened. Mayor Eric Adams's office released a statement. "Last night's exchange has prompted serious reflection. I acknowledge the failures in responding to housing concerns in our most vulnerable communities. Today, I will be meeting with the residents mentioned by Assembly Member Mamdani to address their cases personally and ensure no voice goes unheard." But unlike standard political damage control, what followed felt different. That afternoon, Adams canceled a scheduled press event on economic investment and instead visited a tenants center in East New York. No cameras, no press, no podium, just a folding chair, a legal pad, and a room full of residents ready to speak. He listened for hours, sometimes scribbling notes, sometimes just watching in silence, as residents described the broken systems they'd been trapped in, while City Hall sent out tweets. "He seemed different," said community organizer Alicia Perez after the visit. "Not the mayor from the news, more like someone who'd been humbled." "He seemed different," said community leader Janelle Wilson after the meeting. "Not the polished mayor we see on TV. He actually listened more than he talked." Back at City Hall, Adams's staff was instructed to review every unresolved housing and emergency services request from the past year, with priority follow-up on the most urgent cases. 3 senior aides were reassigned to focus exclusively on constituent housing concerns. A week later, Mamdani received a handwritten note from Mayor Adams. "Thank you for the difficult but necessary wake-up call. You were right, I had focused too much on optics and long-term plans, while neglecting the immediate crises happening just blocks away. I'd welcome your partnership in doing better." Mamdani called him directly. They agreed to visit a Crown Heights tenant legal aid clinic together, quietly, without press, so they could speak directly with families facing eviction and displacement. The impact spread far beyond Brooklyn. Across the city, council members and agency officials began reviewing their own constituent services. Response time metrics were implemented in dozens of local offices. Several borough presidents established emergency housing response teams. 3 months later, with bipartisan city council support, Mayor Adams and Assemblymember Mamdani co-sponsored the NYC Housing Response and Accountability Act. The bill included streamlined emergency housing application processes, standardized response time benchmarks for public agencies, funding for constituent offices to hire dedicated housing caseworkers trained to navigate bureaucratic systems. At the press conference announcing the legislation, Adams stood alongside tenants whose stories Mamdani had shared that night: Fatima, Marcus, and Mr. Leon Grant. "This bill reflects what our people have been telling us they need," Adams said, his usual sound bites replaced with sincerity. "Not what we think they need, but what they have actually told us." When asked by a reporter what had changed his perspective, Adams replied simply, "Sometimes the most revolutionary act is just making existing promises work." What I learned after that interview was that theory without action is just noise. The bill passed with overwhelming support and was signed into law 6 weeks later. At the signing ceremony, both progressive and centrist leaders credited the Mamdani-Adams confrontation for sparking a necessary citywide reckoning. Meanwhile, Mamdani continued his work quietly. That same evening, as cameras focused on the legislative win, he was sitting on a folding chair in a community center in Flatbush, helping a tenant fill out an emergency housing form. He had done this hundreds of times before, without applause, without headlines. A young volunteer approached him, a little awestruck. "After what you did on that show, you could be running for something bigger." "But you're still here?" Mamdani smiled. "This is where the real work happens, not on TV, not in speeches, but in rooms like this, where the real fight for dignity begins." And maybe, just maybe, that was the most revolutionary act of all. Not speaking for the people, but listening to them.